everyone, and welcome to another live podcast. My name is Lucy Challenger. I'm the CEO of Polo and Tweed, and welcome to the Voice of Luxury, where in this episode I am joined by the wonderful Alex Grimley. Alex, hello, how are you?
Hi Lucy, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Alex. Now, for those eager viewers, and if you're not listening onto the podcast and actually watching this video, you will see Alex is joining us from a rather exotic location compared to my home office in West Berkshire. Now, Alex is the managing partner of Rox Group Antigua, and he joins us today from the sunny and wonderful island of Antigua. Now, I was very blessed and lucky to meet Alex on the island itself. My husband's family all come from Antigua originally, and Alex has had a fascinating career, as well as his entrepreneurial startups and successful businesses. He's been working in the hospitality industry for many years. So I'm delighted you could join us today, Alex. And I wondered, for all our listeners, perhaps you could just share a little bit about your career and the path and journey you've been down that brings you now to Antigua and these fantastic businesses that you run.
Okay, thanks Lucy. Yes, I'll be very happy to share that with you. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. So my career started at 15 years old, and that was really when you get work experience from school and you go and see your careers officer, who then pretty much tries to tell you exactly what you should be doing in a career. And I just had my mind set on working in a restaurant. Actually, it started off that I wanted to own a restaurant one day, so I worked out that it would probably be a good idea to go and be a chef. So I started out in a small hotel in Weybridge, which is near where I'm from in Surrey. Ended up, when I left school and did my GCSEs, I left home, moved into the hotel and worked there full time. And then during that time, I I remember watching a TV show about the Mirabelle restaurant opening. I mean, this is going back 22 years. And it was Marco Pierre White's restaurant he'd taken over in Mayfair, a very famous spot. And I went there about a week after it had opened. I met Marco, not coincidentally, but as I was leaving the restaurant, met Marco Pierre White. And he said to me, "Hello, young man, which restaurant are you working in?" Because he could obviously tell I was wearing an ill-fitting suit that belonged to my father, clearly didn't look like the normal clientele that were there, and was very fresh-faced. So I spoke passionately about where I worked, and he suggested I should move to London. And his parting comment was, "When you're ready to move to London, give me a call." So I naively went home and thought, Marco wants me to give him a call when he's ready for me to work in London, so I'll give him a buzz. I tried calling the restaurant, obviously didn't get Marco. But I did recall that in the show about the Mirabelle, he talked about how he got a pastry chef to work for him by ringing him every single day until he finally agreed. So I rang every one of his restaurants every day until he finally called me back and agreed to meet me for an interview. And I said, "Do I need to bring a CV?" And he said, "No, bring your knives and bring your passion." And there was a bit of swearing in there as well, just to add emphasis, but I didn't want to bring it out on the podcast. So I turned up for this meeting with him and a guy called Charlie Rushton at the Mirabelle. And of course, Marco didn't turn up. But I spoke passionately to the guy, Charlie, who had no idea I was coming. And he gave me what we call a stage in the kitchen, which is like an unpaid trial. I then went to do trials in a few other restaurants, and actually ended up not working for Marco at that point, but I went to work for Jean-Christophe Novelli, age 17 in Notting Hill. And that was the beginning, really, the real start of, London life career. I had this, after working for Novelli for about a year, I was itching to work for Marco, and I had an opportunity to go to the Criterion. And the guy I was living with at the time, was a chef who knew, loads of great chefs in London. He said to me, "You will absolutely hate working for Marco. Everyone's on drugs, everyone's crazy, it's dog eat dog, it's so competitive, everyone's awful." He was right about absolutely everything except for the fact I loved it. And so I went to work for Marco for 2 years. Left there because the head chef left to open a restaurant with a guy called Richard Neat in the Oxo Tower. Went there to join his first brasserie and then the fine dining restaurant. Sadly, that went into receivership. There was a bit of a recession in London around that time. It was when we went to war with Iraq for the second time, and lots of restaurants ended up closing. So that closed. I went back to work for Marco in the Belvedere in Holland Park. From there, I went to work for Richard Neat's old head chef from his restaurant in Cannes, because Richard Neat was the first British chef to ever win a Michelin star in France.
Yeah.
So his head chef, Warren Garrity, opened a restaurant at the Great Eastern Hotel in Liverpool Street. So he took over the Aurora restaurant. I was there for a couple of years, and then Warren left the year they were going to, I believe, the Michelin Guide had said we were going to get a Michelin star. And if I recall correctly, Warren resigned because he didn't want the hotel to get the star because it was time for him to move on in his career and he wasn't happy with a few things. So like a true artist, just left. So I ended up leaving and worked in the events department for a year and a half. And then one day, I think 6 months prior to the day I'm about to talk about, I could be heard saying, I will never leave London. You know, I love London, it's the best place ever, and, you know, career's going well. 6 months later, I totally had enough of the weather. Couldn't handle it. We'd just had a summer that there was no sunshine. I was working in basement kitchens. I got like 1 week off to go to Ibiza with my friends. They were all still there for a second week. I came home miserable and started complaining to a chef friend of mine in the pub. And he said his company that he worked for in London were based in Dubai. Okay. And was I interested in getting a job there? So I sent him my CV. Went home and Googled Dubai because I didn't know where it was. I knew it was sort of somewhere, I thought it was somewhere near Asia. I thought it was a country. Started to hear a lot of noise about it. It was just that time where everyone was starting to go over there, and had an interview with the exec chef at the Burj Al Arab, the most famous hotel shaped like a sail. And 3 weeks later, I was on a flight out there, and I then worked in Dubai for 2.5 years.
Wow. After saying that you didn't want to be in London, a few weeks later, you're off to Dubai.
Exactly. Yeah, basically, yeah. So, yeah, it went from loving London so much to just being over the weather in England. And 3 weeks later, I was on my way to the desert. So at age 23, I was the second in charge of the restaurant at the top of the Burj. And then later, when the head chef left, I ran it for probably the last 18 months I was there. And then the lady that handled my recruitment for the company, Jumeirah, then approached me because she was working for Kerzner International. And I went to work for the one and only Rithi Bar in the Maldives as executive sous chef. Absolutely hated living on a tiny island at like 25 years old and single. So as much as it was paradise, it was prison in paradise. Great job, great hotel, loads of freedom, but just freedom in the job was like no freedom in your personal life. And so from there, I was approached by the Gordon Campbell Gray at the time out of London to come to Antigua as exec chef of Carlisle Bay Resort. Okay. So age 26, I moved here as the exec chef, Carlisle Bay. That's what brought me to the island 13 years ago. And then did 3 seasons there. And then somebody reminded me that I'd always said I wanted a restaurant by 30. So at age 29, I opened Sheer Rocks. Then we've just celebrated our 10th birthday. So without talking too much about the present company, that is the run up to it. That's
incredible. Gosh, and what gumption you had from that sort of teenage days of calling Marco repetitively until you could get in the door to then, as you say, before your 30th, setting up your first restaurant. And I think that's what resonates me about this series of meeting people like yourself. They have that drive and that perseverance to just keep going, despite, you know, potentially mishaps, like you say, being stuck on that desert island, which, you know, to average Joe might think, oh gosh, paradise in the making. But for you, you found that suffocating. But that didn't stop you then from going to another island, albeit a much bigger one, where one can have a bit more of a social life, to keep persevering. That's incredible. So you've obviously seen the industries change. You've seen, you know, the restaurant industries at the height of all your different places that you've worked adapt and change. And restaurants strike me as being one of the hardest industries to work within, because fashions come and go. You know, there's hot chefs, then 2 years later, you've never heard of them again. You know, what is it about your job that makes you want to get up every day and face this new challenge? What is it that's so unique about and special about what you do?
I think, I mean, it's changed over the years. I mean, I think, when I was younger and as a chef, it was about feeling that you were good, well, knowing you were good at something and really enjoying it, and the adrenaline that came with it. Yeah. And adrenaline's incredibly addictive, but it's also great because there's no low. It's just a sort of permanent high and boost of energy. So that definitely, through my teenage years and my 20s, that was definitely the thing. It's changed a lot since, lots of people ask me, do I miss the kitchen? Because I stopped cooking about 6 years ago. I obviously still cook, for my daughter at home, but, professionally, I don't so much. And it's not really the creative, you miss a little bit of the creative side, but you still get to do that as an entrepreneur. Yeah. And the beauty of the restaurant industry is it's different every day. There's no mundane repetitiveness. It is, specials can always be different. You can have creative flair. There's always someone to train and develop. So I think really what gets me out of bed these days is growth, like personal growth, team growth and company growth. And it's if you can see somebody come along, from, a line staff position, being at the sort of bottom of the ladder to, like, for example, our head chef of Sheer Rocks, who is, been with us 10 years and started at the bottom and now runs the kitchen, that is a reason to get out of bed every morning for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I love the sense that it is such a quick moving industry, and you can come in the kitchen, you can come in from the management perspective or the waiting perspective, and you can really develop your career and travel around the world if that's what you so desire. But, if someone's listening to this and thinking, I would love to work in a high-end restaurant, I would love to cook in it, I'd love to get my foot in the door, and obviously commenting on earlier what you said about calling Marco every day, you might now get phone calls every day from prospective people. But what would be your advice to someone listening to this who's wanting to get into the industry, who dreams of working for these famous chefs or being a famous chef themselves?
I think it's not a terribly hard industry to get into. And I mean, historically, lots of people have fallen into it. I think the worry these days is that a lot of young people think that, they're going to be putting food on a plate with tweezers and they're going to be an Instagram sensation. And I think there's a lot more to it than that. And so I think, first of all, you've got to understand your passion. If this really, truly is your passion, all you need to do is pick up the phone to that top chef or go and eat in their restaurant, sit there, ask if they're around afterwards and talk passionately about why you want to be a chef, and anyone can get a stage. I think all the best chefs in London will allow someone in the kitchen for a day to see what they're doing. Because, I mean, even when I worked in London, I'd do stages, at the Square with Philip Howard, went to Gordon Ramsay when he only had 1 restaurant and 2 stars. We go to the other Marco restaurants, and even like Tom Aitken and places like Pied à Terre. And so, you just pick up the phone and talk passionately, and you'll get your foot in the door. Once you've got your foot in the door, you've got to commit fully, because if you don't, you'll just get eaten alive. It's dog eat dog. Yeah. I'll give you a great example. When I worked, sorry, a cat has just turned up behind me. It's not normally in the restaurant, but the restaurant is closed at the moment. Just cut that. And no, not on my lap. What are you doing?
Don't worry.
Obviously, when there's guests, you don't allow cats in the restaurant. Someone go and get a dog. Where was I? You've got to commit fully, and you've got to learn as much as possible. And I think a great example, when I worked for Marco, it was proper dog eat dog. And if someone turned up, what happened was when there wasn't a job in the kitchen, you'd say you want to go and work there. So when I worked for him the first time, you work unpaid until someone else walks out or gets fired. And so there's always somebody walking out because the pressure was so much and everyone was so crazy. I worked for 3 days and then somebody walked out, so I got a paid position. A month later, someone else turned up through the door and I realised I was the last one in. I needed to work extra hard to keep my job. And when I left 2.5 years later, it was on my own accord. So, but it really was dog eat dog. Now, I don't think things are anywhere near as bad as that anymore, but there's still competition. So it's definitely learn as much as possible, commit fully and be passionate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we see these success stories, like, your career path and the businesses that you now run in Antigua, I think we are seduced by this, final Instagram perfect image, and we don't see that hard work. And I can imagine, and I've never worked in a professional kitchen. My cooking is much to be desired, according to my husband and probably myself. But it must be an incredibly stressful environment. I mean, I imagine the Gordon Ramsay, TV show he had where he was swearing and shouting at people. I mean, are all kitchens professional kitchens like that, or are some slightly less stressful?
I would hate to think restaurants are still like that now. I don't think they are. Certainly ours aren't, and I wouldn't tolerate it. But rewinding sort of 20 years, yes, all the best kitchens were like that.
Wow.
They were racist, sexist, ageist, and and abusive. And it was sort of very. I think at the time everyone thought it was locker room banter, and everybody sort of got on the bandwagon. And I always remember this one girl I worked with who had to work twice as hard to prove herself. She's now a very successful chef. She's doing great in London, and she probably wouldn't change the past. We stay in touch and we laugh about the craziness. And certainly I do. I mean, I remember, being punched in the face, being burnt with a hot knife. It was madness in those days, but there was something very addictive and fun about it, because when, in a crazy kind of way, when someone else walked out, you felt a sense of pride that you were stronger than that and you were still going.
Sure.
But there was some crazy stories.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting you mentioned the gender aspect as well, because I think more and more there are now world famous female chefs, whereas 10, 15 years ago, there were much less female household names in terms of the chefing world. And as a woman myself, I enjoy seeing both genders be successful and not just one. So it's really interesting you sort of see those two sides of it. Looking back at your career and obviously being thrust into these incredibly, high energy octane situations, how much value do you put on your education and your training and, working in these positions to where you have come to now? What was that journey like, and how much value do you put back on it?
I think I'm definitely a product of everywhere I've worked. And then because you move around quite a lot, you learn new techniques from new chefs. And I think, the number one hardest thing when you change jobs is, someone will say, make a béarnaise sauce, then tell you it's wrong, even though the last really successful chef that showed you how to make it would have said that was right. And so it's understanding that every chef has their own way and puts their own influence on it, and not letting that hold you back, but rather, if you learn all of those different ways, you then actually get to make a best of version that is going to be even better. So the industry constantly improves, because everything you learn, you get to keep, and then everything you get to add is an improvement on that foundation. So 100%, all those experiences are great. I mean, when I think, working for Marco taught me to work under pressure, work quickly. The Criterion was a crazy restaurant doing 300 for lunch and 450 guests for dinner. And I worked on, I'd be on the fish section in the summer and the meat in the winter. So I was always on the busiest section. And Richard Neat had the most incredible palate, who could just get flavors out of ingredients that you didn't know possible. Jean-Christophe Novelli made one dish better than anybody else, but was a total, no disrespect to him, he's a wonderful and he's an absolute gentleman, but car crash during service of just like one of the messiest people. But when it came to creating one dish, he was a genius. And so I learned something from everybody, and, and all the head chefs along the way. And so I think the experiences are really important. The actual educational aspect and sort of going to college, I really don't think gave me that much for my career, but I think there's a lot of better opportunities out there now, and it's certainly a calmer way to give somebody a foundation and understanding before they're released in sort of the competitive world that it is.
Yeah, no, and what strikes me about these sort of specific chefs that you mentioned, and for example, I've eaten at Heston's the Fat Duck, and menus and chefs like this seem to be, they're quite almost like chemistry. It doesn't seem like they've created them in perhaps a normal, well, certainly not, average Joe in the kitchen creating. They're using these amazing tools and techniques. So how much did you find that you enjoy developing that? Or is that a specific type of chef that would pull out the Bunsen burner to get their desired results?
It's definitely a different type of chef. It was very much, although it existed when I was in London, because I mean the fact that was very much a relevant place, and I mean and fantastic. I had an amazing meal there as well. And I think Pierre Garnier was probably the chef who started molecular gastronomy. But for me, it was very much the next generation of cooking. So I was very much that sort of first generation, I suppose, that came after the sort of super chefs that shaped London, you know, Pierre Kaufman, Raymond Blanc, well, I say London, England, I should say, Raymond Blanc, Pierre Kaufman, the Roux brothers, you know, Nico Ladenez. They were the guys who really shaped it. Marco was that product of those super chefs. And then, yeah, I suppose I was the next generation after that. Heston came, you know, at that time as well, and he went off on this molecular way. Of course, there's things that every chef can take from it. We won't be serving white chocolate and caviar at Catherine's Cafe because, quite frankly, it's just not why people come here. But Heston is a genius at understanding what taste profiles go together. But there's a lot of techniques you can use. You know, cooking on sous vide is brilliant because of the temperature control. There's a lot of technology that can help us now understanding, you know, there's always been a science behind understanding like what temperature fat renders or what temperature a protein cooks. And they are sort of basics that every chef should know. So there's sort of this line between balancing science and cooking. And some chefs have gone more science and some are more sort of, you know, get me out the barbecue, I'm going to cook on smoke and flames. And, you know, and so I think there's space for everyone. And that's what's great about the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you were developing the menus and the style of service and you know the foods that would be served in your restaurants in Catherine's Cafe and Sheer Rocks, you know, what do you brainstorm ideas? Do you have mood boards? I mean, what goes into a creation of a restaurant? Where do you even begin?
This is a really good question, actually. So Sheer Rocks I'm going to make it sound really simple, but I'll break it down afterwards. Literally with Sheer Rocks, we created a restaurant we wanted to go to. And that sounds obvious, but if I think about lots of people I know who own restaurants and hotels, they don't stay in that type of hotel when they travel. They don't eat in that type of restaurant. And so when Sheer Rocks started, it was me sort of thinking back to great days in Ibiza of just eating, you know, tapas food. You know, the vibe in the Caribbean is very sort of Balearic in that way of it's quite laid back. It's a different style of hippie, but it's there, you know, and we're talking about the old Ibiza now, not, you know, I'm not talking about Ushuaia or Hard Rock Hotel or anywhere. I'm talking about, you know, getting off the beaten track and, you know, going out to Casper Giz in the mountain and having like a stew that's been cooking for 2 days or something. And so it was about, you know, sharing plates of food because I'm the worst person to eat with because I'll always have my fork in your plate anyway, which obviously pre-COVID. And so, you know, cool tunes, great views, and just sort of flowing booze. And it was all about those things, you know, friendly staff above overtrained staff. Yeah. And then in the evening, a more elegant, romantic setting. I don't like the term fine dining, but casual dining with fine food. Yeah. And so that was the concept. When we changed the dishes there, it's really just about which dish could we improve on, because when we come up with a new dish, if it's not better than the last one, then the rules are simple. We don't change it. Sure. So a lot of dishes stand the test of time, and some of them, they've run their course, it's time to upgrade. Catherine's was different. We took over a going concern. It had a great concept already. It was French brasserie on the beach. The bit we really worked on first was developing the beach area because they kind of had the same menu. It wasn't really a beachy menu. It was great to sit by the beach, but it was a bit more sort of, you know, dressed in linen, elegant food, glass of rosé, whereas we wanted the kind of, you know, you're going to go for a dip in the sea, have a bite to eat to soak up the booze and, you know, enjoy a bottle of rosé. Yeah. And we're just about to try and revamp it and change the concept a little bit, actually. We're going to use this closure as an opportunity. So the brainstorming will start with, we'll write down, you know, we sort of think, what are our favourite beach restaurants in the world? What are they famous for? How does that relate to the great produce we get here? Because it has to revolve around a sense of place. It has to feel Caribbean, even though it's French. Yeah. And then what dishes, you know, what dishes do we want to eat on the beach? And then we'll look at the sales of what are the most popular dishes. And then we'll try to balance it because you can't be too niche in Antigua. You have to, you know, in London, if you've got, you know, Claire Smith's just won her 3rd Michelin star, and if you want to go to her restaurant, it's because you want her cooking.
Sure.
You know, you go to, whereas in Antigua, really, you're coming to Catherine's Cafe for a whole collection of things. It's a wonderful location. The staff are lovely. You want a good meal, but you're getting people who are in their 20s and you're getting people who are in their 80s and everything in between. So you need to cast a net wide enough that will appeal to all markets.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And Alex, you know, in my own life, many years ago, in another life, I was an actress. And when I learned about film in a high level and I was appearing on film and television, I stopped being able to watch films as well, because I would sort of break down what was happening. I was saying, oh, that's an interesting, you know, change scene, or look at that camera angle. So when you're not running your businesses, and in normal times when you're traveling, coming back to the UK to see, you know, friends and family, or traveling the world, can you still enjoy fine dining or you know, lovely food? And do you still explore restaurants? How do you cope when you're out in the real world eating? Are you sort of breaking everything down and sort of seeing the fine detail of everything, or can you just relax and enjoy it?
I've definitely learnt to do both. And I think in Antigua, I've definitely learnt to just sit back and enjoy the experience and try not to overanalyze. The worst thing, of course, when I go to a restaurant in Antigua is, you know, the owner or the chef will ask me afterwards. You know, I had a meal recently, there were 10 of us, and it's a new restaurant that's opened. And the owner came up to me afterwards in front of all my guests and said, I want your absolute honest feedback. How was everything? And I just sort of shriveled away because I just didn't want to get into, you know, there's an unlimited level of report I could deliver at this point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I just decided to sort of pick on one, like, feature and just say, look, you know, there's sort of, it was very formal in the way they presented everything, but it's quite a fun location. The menu was fun. So I just said, in my personal opinion, you're fun guys, you should make it a fun place and try not, you know, don't take it so seriously. You know, it's cool, the food's nice. But I also at the same time, if I'm like traveling to London or somewhere, I always want to do like a 2 or 3 Michelin star restaurant, but I find myself really analyzing it. And at the end of it, finding it almost a bit boring, like too many places are a bit stiff. Where I enjoy most now will be somewhere in a great location where you can have a bit of fun with the staff, and it's got a good music concept, and, you know, and the food is easy and good to share. And so I prefer places like that now, you know, places like Kiln in London, or Cricket was fantastic when I was back a couple of years ago. And so more sort of casual sharing, you know, the owners the waiters kind of in like a shirt, jeans and Converse or something, you know, rather than like a 3-piece suit serving me my lunch. It's just not for me anymore.
Yeah. And totally, you can see that in how you've developed your restaurants, and you have the incredible food, but you have such lovely staff that work for you, and they're so friendly and so warm. And I think that's a key about repeat business, because that sort of fine dining Michelin star experience is lovely, but then personally, I'm not going to do that every night because, well, quite frankly, I don't have time to sit through a 14-course taster menu. But also, you know, it's just about that human connection and that relaxed vibe. So, Alex, you know, going back through your incredible career that you've been talking about, and without perhaps sharing any trade secrets, are there any funny or unusual stories that you could share with the listeners of something that you've perhaps experienced?
I mean, there's so many sort of shocking and fun stories, but one I particularly enjoyed was when they always seem to come back to Marco, but I mean, definitely some fond years there. When I worked for Marco, I remember there was a chef coming for an interview as a sous chef, and he'd previously worked at the Ritz. Now, at the time, all Marco chefs wore T-shirts, butcher's aprons, jogging bottoms, and Doc Martens. Now, I never wore Doc Martens, but, you know, we're in trainers. And chefs at the Ritz would wear, you know, very well polished steel toe cap boots, like in the army, black trousers, or even, you know, the old commie trousers, a proper bragard jacket, a neckerchief, and a tall hat. And this immaculately clean shaven chef was walking down the steps into the kitchen as, I won't name his name because he's a pretty famous chef in London these days, actually, but you know, had taken some sort of hallucinogenic drug whilst working in the pastry department, was standing there with a mop head on his head and mooing like a cow. and we're in the middle of service, and as this chef from the Ritz walks down the stairs and into the kitchen, he takes one look at like these scruffy, messy chefs just frantically like turning out this amazing food. This pastry chef in the corner off his head mooing, and he spun on his heel, turned around and just walked straight out again. And everyone just cheered. They just loved it.
Well, it's, you know, not every day you see a chef mooing in the pastry department. That is fabulous. So Alex, you mentioned obviously at the moment the restaurants are closed, and of course in the UK, as you know, we're back in lockdown, and COVID changed the world. It suddenly made us all furiously aware of washing our hands every second of the day, and obviously had a huge impact on your businesses. So how did you find that progression, that transition? What did you put in place? What do you do now to survive?
I mean, obviously when the first lockdown happened out here, it was actually the end of March when we pretty much went into a full island lockdown, and there was very little we could do in the restaurants. You know, we were just told to close and no one was allowed out. Takeaway wasn't an option. So to start with, I think, you know, we just all took a little bit of time out. And then as soon as we could, we opened a takeaway and a delivery service. And we did that under our Rocks Box brand, which was always wine delivery on island. We made it food. We started doing meal kits. So, you know, a meal kit would be something that you'd take home, and it's sort of 1 or 2 steps to dinner. Yeah. So everything pre-prepared, very simple instructions. And then obviously the takeaway was hot or cold food ready to eat. And we were offering delivery. So we adapted very quickly to open to that. But I mean, really on island, there wasn't enough volume to make any money, but it was about creating jobs for the team. It was about trying to support as many people as possible, keeping the brand relevant. And Shearrocks has a real value to it on island. I think a lot of Antiguans are very proud to, you know, of the awards it's had for the island. It's the first restaurant to get any international recognition, and we were voted best restaurant in the Caribbean 3 times, including last year, which was with the Caribbean Journal. So that's, you know, it sort of in a way needs to be open, I think, to give hope to the industry and to tourism. Yeah. Catherine's was too big to do anything takeaway with, so it stayed closed for 7 months last year. Wow. So obviously once we could reopen to guests, it was about spacing out tables, you know, building hand wash stations on the entrance to the restaurant, which I might add, actually, the hand wash station thing is my absolute favorite thing of COVID, because I'm obsessed with washing my hands anyway. And so now being able to wash your hands on the way into the restaurant is literally my dream. So very happy about that as a new standard. But yeah, it's just, you know, it's weird. It's hard trying to work, you know, all day with a mask on, and it's all a bit bizarre. But I think what I'm really proud of the team achieving is once we were able to open the restaurants again, obviously pre being shut down last week, I was worried that we wouldn't be able to deliver a fun experience, because we're not allowed to dance, and, you know, you can't take mask off, so you don't get to see half of, you know, the best half of everyone's face. And so it was strange, but the team really managed to still be themselves and still get on with it. And I think the guests who were coming out were so grateful to be in Antigua in some sunshine, and very respectful. You know, tips were great. People tipped really well, because I think they understood like what a hardship the team had had. So we adapted quickly and did what we could. But I mean, without doubt, we've had a massive dent in our business, as everyone has here. But I'm also confident that we're well positioned to bounce back quickly when things get better.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that will happen very quickly now that the vaccine's being rolled out across the world. So, you know, Alex, in your downtime, you know, when you're not running your businesses, you know, COVID had an effect on people, as we know, around the world. You've already spoken about it, with financial difficulties, with mental health. I mean, what do you do when you're not running your businesses? What have you done during this last year and a bit to keep yourself grounded, to keep yourself sane? You know, what practices have you put in place with your own life?
I mean, personally, I did a lot of running last year, and that for sure helped, you know, in a sort of, you know, headspace, in terms of, you know, keeping the headspace very positive and clear. That definitely helped. So although 2020 was a bad year for a lot of things, it was definitely a good year for running for me. Other than that, I love spending time with my daughter and going on little adventures, whether it's a hike or a swim, or, you know, trying to find a turtle, or taking the dog for a walk. And just what I realized is I've scaled back to really realizing at times quite precious. And so spending it with people that deserve it, and, you know, really close friends, and and so I've done more of that. So I suppose the other thing of not just an obvious time factor, but is to just sort of think of, you know, the future, what we're going to do, how we're going to adapt. And lastly, I think the really important thing is what you can do for other people, because somebody's always worse off. And I think so if you can help somebody else out, I think that actually, in a sort of, not in a selfish way, but it gives you such a positive feeling as well to do something good for somebody else. And we really, you know, as a company, once we'd taken 2 weeks out during the first 2 weeks of, you know, the first lockdown, the second 2 weeks we got together, and the topic of conversation wasn't how can we save the business, it was what can we do for the team that we laid off. And all the managers got together and we did a fundraiser, and we started a food bank, which lasted, I think, I can't remember, 18 weeks or something, where we did sort of a food parcel for all the team that were laid off. And the other thing the managers were really good at doing was, which actually I think in a way got probably more credit at the end of it than the food parcel, was just staying in touch with the team, just checking in, are you okay, what are you up to? And we tried to sort of send like the odd message to them, you know, think about what you can use this time for, you know, learn a new skill, help somebody out, you know, do something entrepreneurial. You know, one of the guys started cooking for all his neighbours and selling the food, and then whatever he made, he would go and buy more food and then sell for twice the price. And he started growing a business. He employed like 2 cousins to help him and stuff. And another girl never came back to work for us again because she opened a little crepe shop in town and did really well, and she's doing great now. So, you know, you don't have to sit on your hands just because, you know, what's in front of you has been taken away. There's a lot of opportunity. You just got to think about what you can do.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. So Alex, we're going to go into a quick fire round question round. You haven't prepared for this, so you don't know it's happening. I am going to say two words. You say the word that you're most drawn to. You can give me a reason if you wish. You don't have to, but don't think about it too much. Just say which word you feel most drawn to. So for example, I might say cats or dogs, and you would say dogs. There we go.
Dogs.
Okay. Right, let's go. Morning or night?
Morning.
Netflix or party?
Party.
Cooking.
Always party.
Cooking or being cooked for?
Oh, I always love, this is tough. I don't know. Being cooked for. But anyone who cooks for me will say, I always want to take over and get involved. So they'd probably laugh at that. But being cooked for is the dream.
Fish or chips?
Fish.
Lamborghini or Ferrari?
Ferrari.
Brad.
Not sure why.
Brad or Angelina?
Pass, zero interest.
Zero interest. Rain or sun?
Sun every time. That's why I left London.
Sea or swimming pool?
Sea. It gives you something that a pool can't.
Yeah. Fast or slow?
I don't just mean like lunch. Fast.
Sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
Eggs or bacon?
Eggs.
Sting or Prince?
Oh, Prince.
Gold or silver?
Gold.
Today or tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Nice. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. So, Alex, it has been such a fabulous conversation with me today, and I'm sure everyone listening has really, really enjoyed this as well. But before we wrap up, I wondered, you know, looking back at your life, at your career path, your journey, your constant sort of banging down the door to succeed, which you have done. What do you think it takes to succeed? What is the journey of life all about?
I think it's taking every opportunity and not allowing your lack of confidence or your fear to hold you back. And I think it's a really good, you know, when somebody thinks somebody's unlucky or lucky, I think the best analogy is, oh, I was unlucky because I didn't meet that person who helped your career. but you're not luck. Luck might have sat you next to them, but it was the positive energy that made you talk to that person who helped the next deal or whatever. So I think it's always, having your eyes open to what's around you, being positive, being good to people, because for sure you'll always meet someone again another time. And I think, really finding out what you're passionate about and somehow trying to follow that. And I think, if you stay positive and you keep pushing forward, and you don't, try not to let fear hold you back, I think anyone can do anything. Because I used to really lack confidence talking to people, and I think, today it's like one of the best parts of my job is being able to learn about other people and listening and, doing something new. So,
yeah. No, I love that. Don't let fear hold you back. I think we should all live to that on a daily basis. So everyone listening who wants to now go and find Alex, and of course, please, if you're in Antigua, go and visit his restaurant, Sheerrocks and Catherine's Cafe, because I've been myself. They are utterly incredible. I cannot wait to come back to all of them. You can go and find him on Instagram. He's got lots of different aspects to his business. He's got the Rocks group events on Instagram, which are doing events, weddings, I believe, private chefing, etc. So you can go and follow him there. You've got Sheerrocks, which is one of the restaurants we've been talking about. We've got Catherine's Cafe, which is phenomenal. Live music normally, lots of bottles of rosé, which I can attest to of drinking many of them. We've got the Rocks Box Antigua, which is what Alex was talking about with the takeaway service and in-home dining. And then you've got Urchin Atelier as well. So press rewind, listen to those all again, go and find Alex, add him on Instagram, DM him every day if you want a job with him. And Alex, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Lucy. It was an absolute pleasure. I enjoyed it.